You have to go to war with yourself.
Welcome
to the On a Mission.
The On a Mission podcast.
You've got one of the best jobs in the world.
I have to say you've had some really astounding guests.
You're generally a force for good.
Mr. Jaymie Icke, welcome to the On a Mission podcast.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invite.
It's hilarious. We've just been chatting for 10 minutes and realised we didn't really do much of an intro, so thought we best start again.
Absolutely.
So, Jaymie Icke, iconic name, son of the legendary David. What was it like growing up in the Icke household? And from a son's perspective, more specifically, what was it like watching your dad get widely ridiculed by the mainstream media?
When I was really young, I was traveling around with him to places in America, to doing shows and things like that. And obviously I didn't really, I suppose you don't think too much when you're really little. Like, why is my dad on a stage and people are coming to watch him? I didn't really think too much about it. And then it was when I got to high school and you started to get stick for things he maybe said previously and stick for things he'd been, like the Wogan interview, people used to bring that up. Which is ironic because I was born in 92, so nobody in my high school was alive when that happened.
I was going to say, what year was Rogan? Because he did it twice, didn't he? What was the first one?
91 was the first one. So they're obviously being fed by their parents. You know, that crazy bloke's son's in your class. Tell him about this. You know, it's really sad as parents to think about that. Like, now I've got kids of my own. The thought of telling my kids to take the mick out of somebody else because of something their dad did is bizarre. But anyway, so that was really tough because I didn't understand a lot of what had happened. But you say that second Wogan interview, 2006 that was. I remember watching that and I'd have been 14. And that's the first time I ever saw any clips of the first one. So I remember my mum was trying to get me to go to bed. She was like, you don't need to watch this, don't need to watch this. And obviously I was 14, like, come on, I'm old enough to watch this now. And that was when I was watching that going, okay, I get where that comes from now, all the stick I'd been getting in school. But it was weird, to say the least, in school. It was very strange. But our relationship when I was a kid was built on sport. A very sporty family. Obviously, he played professionally as well. And you
were a goalkeeper too, weren't you?
Yeah. I was at Manchester United till I was 16, and right throughout my childhood, from like 9 years old, and I started playing till 17. We'd train 2 or 3 times a week. Pick me up from school, we go training. And that was what our relationship was really built on. And he always used to say through that period that was kind of his sanity, because you're just going and kicking some footballs, hanging out with your son, rather than the intensity of the research world that he spends most of his time in. So it was quite cool, actually, because that was the time I got to spend with him. Because when I was young, he was traveling a lot. When he talks about the time he spent in America, and hearing all those things that he heard through the 90s, obviously that was when I was very little. So he would be away for sort of 2-3 months at a time, which must have been tough. It was tough for me, and it must have been tough for him as well. Think about being away from my own kids for that long, and I'm away for 3 days while we're doing this, and I don't want to be away, let alone 3 months. So yeah, it was an interesting dynamic growing up. But as I got older, started to ask more questions, had more conversations about the kind of stuff that he does. That's when I really got interested in it, and obviously we've worked together ever since.
Was it that Wogan interview, the second one, that opened your eyes to how much of a big deal your dad actually was?
Yeah, so that was 2006. I remember the year before he'd done a big event at Brixton Academy, and that was kind of probably the first time I was like, okay, wow, there's like 2,000 people here to come and see my dad. He's obviously doing something. And that's where, to an extent, growing up on the Isle of Wight, where you're cut off from that, you didn't really see that, because nothing big happens on the Isle of Wight. So then all of a sudden Friday, leave school early, go to London, and there's a massive theatre and your dad's, sold out. You walk up to Brixton Academy, where they always, even now, still have the name of the person that's performing right at the front on that particular day. And you see your dad's name there and sold out next to it. That was probably the big realization for me. And then I think when you watch that Wogan interview, if you watch the second one, the difference, he's like a different person. Like in the first one, he was very passive, and you could tell Wogan was the one that was dominating that exchange, in the sense of, Dad will say himself, he sort of didn't know where he was at that point, in terms of, he'd just gone from a really mainstream world to then a really not mainstream world, and was probably still trying to digest it. Whereas the second one, he walked in and dominated that in a way that I don't think Wogan was expecting.
It was like a level of validation, which, again, another wave of validation for all of you, really, as a family, was COVID, when so much of
Yeah.
what your dad was talking about over 30 years ago was actually came into fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. He warned about, the potential for that, and also the things that he said right at the start. Like we were talking earlier, weren't we? About he was talking about a vaccine after like a couple of weeks when nobody was even mentioning that word. That wasn't even coming from the mainstream media at that point. And he was saying, this is all about an excuse for that. And obviously you're called crazy, you're called X, Y, and Z, and obviously that's been proven to be correct. And all the things he said about, the virus not being proven. Well, no one's really proven it no one has proven it by the sort of stipulations you would use to prove a virus exists. And all the warnings about the dangers of the vaccine as well, again, they've all been proven to be very accurate given what's happened since. Like, I don't think anybody in the world today regrets not having that. But a hell of a lot of people would regret having it because of the side effects are undeniable.
Obviously, because of your upbringing, you have been brought up to think very critically,
Yeah.
to ask questions. We were having a bit of a laugh earlier, weren't we, when we were having a coffee, because a lot of people are quite surprised to know that I bought into the narrative, hook, line and sinker. And a part of me was quite embarrassed and ashamed to admit that, but I do think it's important because there's a lot of people out there that are very similar to myself. Thankfully, I never had the vaccination, but I know a lot of people have had 1, 2, sometimes even more than that.
Yeah.
I don't even want to call them vaccinations because they don't meet the definition
No, they
of a
don't, no.
vaccination. But, for the sake of conversation, we'll call it that. And they now completely regret that
Yeah.
decision. But when we're having these conversations, your dad, like you said there, and yourself now with all the work that you're doing with Iconic, same with Gareth, you're making a really valuable contribution to the alternative media. You've got a huge audience, but I still think there's a big space for people who are not yet fully on board to this way of thinking. And there can be so much fear mongering going on from both sides. I think it's quite good to kind of bridge that gap and also normalise to people and almost validate what they've went through, what they've experienced, because perhaps I'm naive, but I do believe the vast majority of people were just acting with the best of intentions at the time with the information that they had.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that we need to remember, and people in the alternative space need to remember this as well, is no one gets everything right, and certainly no one gets everything right the first time. So you mentioned there that you fell for it. To me, that's not, when you say that's embarrassing, that's not embarrassing. What would be embarrassing if you'd still be falling for it now, despite all the evidence? Whereas what a lot of people do is they are too afraid to admit they were wrong, or admit maybe they saw something, in the light of a bit more information. Actually, I see it slightly differently now. So they either double down, which a lot of people have done, and a lot of people did through that period. People then got very angry at the likes of us that were questioning it because it was questioning their narrative, it was questioning their ability to see a situation, or they just sort of detach completely. And I think what's very key with the alternative is that we don't act in a way that's preachy towards people who have maybe bought something but then are reassessing. It's kind of like the analogy of would you have a go at the overweight person walking into the gym for the first time? No, you'd look and go, okay, well done. The homeless person in the job centre, you're not going to give them a stick, and you're going to go and welcome them with open arms because they're trying to change and make a better decision. So for people that bought it, people that had the vaccine, for example, that maybe had side effects, or knew people that did and then changed their opinions, to me, they're actually almost, in a weird way, more important because they fell for it. They did everything they were told to do and it backfired, and now they're angry and they want answers, and they want to basically understand what else they've been lied to about. And I think the key is if you bought something, which lots of people have, in lots of different contexts, is that once you realise I've been lied to about that, is you then continue to question the next thing. Okay, so what else have I been lied to about? Whereas what a lot of people did is they maybe bought it, then they saw through it, and then they moved on. And the next thing the government or the institutions say, they believed it with row reflex action like they did before. And it's, if you've been lied to once, then, inevitably you're going to be lied to again, or you will have been lied to in the past. And I think that's where we need to try and encourage people to go, that as soon as you've acknowledged that you've been hoodwinked once, is you don't get hoodwinked again by doing the same thing and just believing something by reflex action. which I know is easier, or it appears easier in the short term. You know, I had so many arguments in the lockdown period for not wearing a mask, for, you know, walking the wrong way around the shop. For
We spoke about
I know.
this. You and I would have been having a punch up. I nearly got into a proper tear up in Asda's
Really?
because I started challenging somebody for walking the wrong way. You know, when we had all the arrows and things. I was like, excuse me, can't you see that the arrows are... it's honestly, Jaymie, it's really cringe.
It is what it is. It is what lots of people did that and would look back and not do it differently if it happened again. I think that's the key, as I was saying, is if it happens again, would you do the same thing?
Yeah, happens once, shame on you. Happens twice,
Yeah.
shame on me. But you said there that it was almost a gateway to, for some of us, to then looking at the world as an entirety. And one of the things that's hugely important, I know it's important to you as well, is to keep in a high frequency, to keep in a high vibration, as much as a two fingers up to the global elites who are trying to keep us suppressed. But that's very difficult when you go from 0 to 100, like myself and a lot of other people did, in terms of the infrastructure of how this all works. And I don't profess to be an expert in this space, but what started off as a little bit of hesitancy towards a vaccination that seemed to be rushed out, in my case, then led, you know, down rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole. And then you're looking at satanic rituals and paedophilic networks and adrenochrome and all this other stuff. And it's very difficult to maintain that positivity that perhaps we once upheld. Now I'm a lot more, I don't know, aware of it all. And that's why I try to use this podcast as a force for good, to keep the vibration high and talk about a lot of other things as well, about consciousness, about health, about biohacking, which is very similar to yourself, because I, speaking from personal experience, took a massive nosedive with my own mental health when I started to tap into this level of awareness. So it was almost counterproductive, and there was so much fear-mongering going on from both sides, if you like, and the end outcome is the same, low vibration.
Yep, absolutely. I think you got to look at it as almost like a dam. You start taking some bricks out, eventually it's just going to crash, and it's going to be chaos for a bit, but it does calm down. Eventually everything does settle down. And I think for a lot of people, going from living a pretty carefree life, thinking your government's probably lied a bit, but they, on the whole, they're good people. They care about you. The NHS is only there to look after you, and the education system's only there to educate the kids and all that. To then go from that to literally all these things are controlled. The entire world has reacted in the same way to this pandemic or plandemic. And then, like you say, you start going into the deeper things of, what are these politicians, what are these celebrities up to in private, and what that ties into. What does the likes of Jimmy Savile, Jeffrey Epstein, who do they all link up to, and all these people you see on your television screens and in the films and so on. That's a hell of a lot. That's a 0 to 1,000, isn't it? Not a 0 to 100. So I think for so many people, it almost became overkill, where people were just like, this is just like, I've hit too many keys on the computer, it's frozen, I can't compute any of this, so I'm just going to almost go back into my bubble and pretend that's not real. But I think what changed with COVID was, it was real whether you wanted to believe it was or not. Every time you left your house, something was different. You left your house, you went to the shop, you'd be had a go at if you didn't conform. So whether you believed it or whether you didn't, it was still in front of your face. Whereas I think a lot of those other issues that I mentioned there, that don't impact people directly in their daily lives. Where, like, I remember when I was younger, one of the big events that happened was 9/11. But everyone that just got up in London, for example, and went to work the next day, their lives weren't different. They were thinking about what had happened maybe, but their lives hadn't changed. Whereas whether it be, if you had children, the schools were closed. Whether it be you wanted to go for a restaurant, it was shut. You wanted to go into the shop, you were on arrows queuing outside. Everything had changed. So I think all those people that tried to detach couldn't, because it was still just right in front of your face. So I think through that period, it was a massive awakening of people, which was very, very exciting to observe. I think a lot of those people have kind of gone back to their lives now as times have calmed down, but a lot haven't. And a lot have, like you say, gone to research deeper and deeper and deeper things, which to me is only a good thing.
Yeah. How did the awakening of the masses impact yourselves and the work that you were doing?
Well, it definitely gave it a lot more eyeballs, and it definitely gave it a lot more respect because, especially in the early days, March, April 2020, there was no one else really saying this. So you were really going out on a limb, which was making you a target and also making people want to listen because it was giving an alternative perspective on everything. Because obviously the mainstream media, the mainstream political class in its entirety were on the same page. There was literally nobody in the early days calling out anything. So if people wanted any kind of alternative narrative, that's why they had to turn to people like us. That's why YouTube and Facebook stuff was so aggressive in that period at deleting people to try and stop any alternative perspective. And it was interesting. There was a lot of heat there was hit pieces from the press, and there was lots of things. But that was only for me a confirmation you're over the target. Because if they're not worried about you, they'll just ignore you. If they're going for you, trying to discredit you, have a go at you for personal issues, whatever it might be, it's because they're worried about what you're saying. And you don't censor people from a position of strength. It's like the bully doesn't bully from a position of strength. They're a coward. And when all those big interviews that David did with London Real that went out in March, April, May, when they were removed off YouTube and we were kicked off of everything, that was just confirmation that you're doing something right. And yeah, obviously it impacted Iconic a lot because we have our own servers and our own system, completely not beholden to any third party. So that was really, through that period, the only platform we could use to get information out. So obviously impacted that a lot in terms of eyeballs, which was very good in that respect. And it's been an interesting journey in that we literally the website basically doubled in size in like 3 days in April 2020, which was chaos to manage for a few days, but it was good.
Crazy times. We saw a huge rise in the alternative media. I know myself and a lot of other people were negatively impacted. I had a couple 100,000 followers on LinkedIn at the time, and I remember it clearly. It was the day I posted about having Dr. Robert Malone on the podcast.
Yeah.
From that point, the average post used to get, 250,000 impressions. From that day onwards, it was no more than 1,000 impressions per post. I also got a strike on YouTube for putting the interview out. My channel got removed without warning, which they're not meant to do.
No, they're not. You're meant to get strikes on you.
Yeah, when I published the Dr. Peter McCulloch interview,
Right.
The cardiologist.
Yeah.
Most published cardiologist in history. Everything that he said on that interview has now been irrefutably proven to be a fact. But yeah, not only was the interview removed, the entire channel, millions of views, hundreds of videos.
Yeah, a lot of people got that. Peter's a really good example of what I was saying about researching something and then going further and further. Because obviously when he first started speaking, he was talking about the heart implications of the COVID jabs. Now he's talking about vaccines in general now. You see things he's put up this week about childhood vaccines compared to unvaccinated kids and the health of them, which is one of the things Kennedy said he was going to do, was a proper study when he got into office, and she hasn't done in nearly 18 months. But that's a good example, Peter, because we spoke to him right in the early days, and he was coming at it from that cardiologist perspective of explaining why so many particularly young sporting men were dropping down, your Christian Eriksen, Sergio Aguero, people like that. And now he's obviously gone even further, which is a good example of, you realise you've been lied to or hoodwinked once. Okay, I want to go further and further and further and further. If that COVID vaccine hadn't happened, Peter McCulloch would probably still be a very mainstream doctor without looking at those alternatives. So he's a good example of, understanding that if I've been lied to once, what else are you lying to me about?
But there is also a lot of prominent figures in this space that you take issue with, not just in the alternative media, but some of the scientists and doctors.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily take issue with, just question intentions behind, because like you say, a lot of people came into the alternative, the eyeballs on it increased dramatically. And I think there is people that would see that as an opportunity, see it as a bandwagon to jump on. And for me, I think that one of the biggest things the alternative media needs to understand and to be comfortable doing is saying, I don't know. I think we've become so obsessed, whether it's for likes, for clicks, for retweets, to be the first to react to something, the first to comment on something, when you might not actually have an opinion. You might not certainly might not have an informed opinion on something. You could ask me a question. If it's a subject I have no idea about, I'll say I don't know. Whereas a lot of people will try and fumble around an answer rather than say, actually, I don't know. So what a lot of the new people in the alternative do is when they're asked about, let's say, a more deep esoteric topic behind something at the level above politics, basically, they'll try and actually, no, I don't think there's anything to talk about in that respect, because, the politics is where the answers are. And they're not saying that from a position of, well, I've researched here and I've concluded there's nothing there. It's from a position of, I've not researched there, I can't talk about that, so I'll just dismiss that. And I think that's what frustrates me, because you should always be looking to try and learn more, I think. I think especially as a researcher, as a journalist, as a presenter, broadcaster, whatever you want to class them as, you should always accept that you never know everything. You're always trying to learn more. The day that you stop trying to learn, the day everyone else starts catching you up for a start. And it's the day that you just go around in circles. You're not delivering anything else to anyone. If you write a book, for example, and you never research anymore, you're never going to build up on that book. You're just going to write the same one again. And I think a lot of them do
can
that.
I just say on this point, I think it was a previous podcast guest, it was Azim Malhotra was sharing with me the information that 50% of everything that's taught in medical school is obsolete within 5 years.
Yeah, and they spend less than a week on nutrition as well.
Yeah.
Which is quite important to being a doctor, you'd think, anyway. But that's why health's my area of main interest, because I think it's the easiest place to start. All the things that we're talking about to do with politics, to do with new world orders, all those sorts of things. In theory, they're going to take some organisation to try and change. Whereas your health, you decide what you put in your body. You could make a decision to change that literally right now. You don't need anybody else. You don't need someone's permission. You just literally need to make a decision. And I think, to mention COVID again, that whole argument through that period was for health freedom, was for the right to choose what you put in your own bodies. That's why there was such opposition to compulsory vaccinations or the green cards to get into places, was because, well, I shouldn't be told what I have to do in order to live my life. I shouldn't be told I have to have a vaccine to do X, Y, and Z. So if you're fighting for that health freedom, surely then you want to make the right decisions with that freedom to actually benefit your health. To fight against a vaccine, but to then go and have McDonald's 3 times a week. To me, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It doesn't make sense to me, the amount of people that were rooting for Donald Trump and hailing him as an ex-savior when he was clearly pro-vaccination.
Well, he was the grand godfather of the vaccine, he called himself. He called himself,
Precisely.
he said that was the greatest achievement of his presidency.
And he's never reneged on that.
He hasn't. That's where the bizarre mental gymnastics people must play to support him. Because you've got R.F. Kennedy, who he wanted as his health secretary, who spent his entire career rallying against vaccines, saying that he's been asked to do the study to compare the health of vaccinated versus unvaccinated children when he got into office, which he's not done. He's then come into office, the vaccines are still available. There's not an investigation into them. Childhood vaccines, the schedule in America, which is I think 74 vaccines by 16 years old, most anywhere in the world, that's still there. He's also then, the picture on the plane, do you remember the Make America Healthy, with all of them having a McDonald's on the plane?
Was that legit for?
I think it was, yeah, probably. And it's such a bizarre sort of squaring the circle. It doesn't make any sense to me. But people want to believe in a saviour so much.
They really do.
And I think that's where the health thing is really important, because so many people know what the right thing to do is, or at least have an idea what the right thing is, but they don't do it.
I don't know if they do, though. I don't think people understand. Again, I don't think they want to believe, even if you were to present the information to them, about the fact that, like, the chemtrails or the water or just the shit that's in our food, the chemicals that are sprayed, like, people cannot comprehend that the institutions that are there to protect us would be actively trying to poison us with all the carcinogenics, all the things that are knowingly put into our food.
Well, I think people don't want to believe it, because you can't look at the world the same way once you believe that. Once you understand that essentially on the day your kid's born, the institutions are trying to poison them from the minute they're a few minutes old with the vaccines. Or actually, while you're pregnant, they want to give you 2, don't they?
Yeah.
So I think people don't want to believe that because they just living in ignorance. Ignorance is bliss for a while. But I think we're getting to the point now where it's not for anybody because no one's lives are getting better now. Pretty much anywhere in the world, no one's lives are getting better, whether that be financially, whether that be health, whether that be safety on the streets, whatever it is. Most people now are concerned about something, whether it's just trying to survive, whether they're trying to, heat their homes or put food on the table, whether it's worried that AI is going to take their jobs, whether they're worried every time their kid leaves the house or goes into school that they're going to come back unscathed, whatever it might be. People are concerned about something, which is really sad, but also is a massive opportunity because you can try and ignore what's going on, but once it starts to impact your life, it's much more difficult to ignore. And I think we live in a world where most people only care about issues when it affects them directly. And we're now getting to the point that one way or another, like as we're sat here today, tomorrow is the budget, that's going to affect pretty much everybody directly or indirectly in a negative way. So all of a sudden now you can't really ignore it anymore. So that to me is a huge opportunity for people to go, you know what, we used to just ignore it and get on with our lives, or we used to let fault lines divide the rich or the poor or the black or the white or whatever. Whereas now actually we're all being screwed in exactly the same way and we can't just ignore it. Because if we do, it's only going to get worse. If a bully gets no resistance, they're just going to keep going and get worse and worse. And I think we're at that point now where people are almost backs against the wall and there's nowhere else to go. So you've got to come out swinging in one way, shape or form. So although it's quite a dark time on the surface level, I actually see it as a huge opportunity because sometimes it does have to get really bad before people will stand up.
But I still don't think, talking about digital IDs and things like that, the vast majority of people quite comprehend how sinister this actually is and how it's going to impact their lives. And you still have a very ignorant mentality that, I speak to certain people about this and it's like, well, I've got nothing to hide. It's not going to affect me. And trying to explain what's been happening in China since 2017, that you only need to walk across the road jaywalking on a red light and there's facial recognition that's taking money directly out of your bank account and fining you. And then you try to board the plane for your family holiday and you can't get on because you've not taken your bin out for the last 2 weeks. That's when people are really going to understand the severity of it. But it's trying to waken people up at this point before it's too late.
Yeah, I think digital ID could be the unraveling of the system because it's something that the opposition to it transcends party politics. You've got people on the right, on the left, in the middle, all opposing it. The fact that over 3 million people have already signed a petition, and at the moment, it's a concept. It's not here yet. No one knows directly today how it's going to impact their life tomorrow because at the moment, he's just made an announcement, postured a bit that he's the big I am and we're going to do this. But until they say, okay, this is what we're doing and this is the detail of it, then I think you'll see that 3 million become 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. And I think the positive side to this Labour government is they're so unpopular with pretty much everybody. No one voted for... Starmer won because no one wanted the Tories anymore. He didn't win because people wanted him in. Like, he got less votes than Jeremy Corbyn did. And the fact that he's now alienated pretty much everybody already, including his natural Labour base, you couldn't pick a better person to try and bring this in terms of getting opposition to it because anything he does, people are going to oppose, people are going to ask questions of because he's so unpopular. So again, I see that as a massive opportunity. I see that as one good thing about this government because if you compare it to what we've seen in America, because for some reason people seem to think Trump's the savior, he's doing things that if Kamala Harris was doing the same thing had she won the election, people would be up in arms. But because he's doing it, they're quiet because they think he's the guy. So the AI agenda that he's been accelerating, people would have gone, hang on a minute, like you were saying earlier, weren't we opposed to this once? Now all of a sudden we're supporting it because it's our guy.
Yeah.
Whereas...
Not just that. So I was telling you when we were having a coffee earlier about the latest Elon Musk episode with Joe Rogan.
Yeah, they're blocking the sun.
And he's talking about blocking the sun. We were all up in arms about this 2 years ago when Bill Gates was saying it, but because it's Elon, because it's our guy, it's completely fine.
That's the thing. You have a good cop, bad cop, don't you? And Gates is obviously a very sinister bloke, and he's very obvious to most people that he is that. Whereas because Musk's got this kind of charisma to people, and he's autistic and does some weird things, and everyone thinks he's a quirky guy, you don't connect that sinister behavior with it. He's just, to me, he's just a Bond villain, Elon Musk. Like, he's one of the most sinister individuals. You look at every single company he's got, they are in some way accelerating the agenda, whether it's SpaceX putting all the satellites up that are beaming radiation at the Earth that's going to be needed for this control, whether it's Neuralink putting chips in people's brains, whether it's electric cars, driverless cars. He's pushing it all. And if anyone else was doing it that was on the left or wasn't, saying a few things about certain things people might agree with, people would be up in arms.
Like, how can you be anti-vaccination, forced vaccination, and pro-Neuralink?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
I do not get it at all. It makes absolutely no sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But the sales pitch of Neuralink is to help people that have got brain-related conditions, and that will be the sales pitch of it. Like the sales pitch of so many of these things, you can understand, as in they always word it in a way that you understand or can try and justify it. But when you actually dig into it, it doesn't make any sense. Like digital ID here, they're trying to say it's going to control immigration, it's going to control the right to work and things like that. As soon as you ask 2 or 3 basic questions of that, it falls apart. Absolutely falls apart. People have already got a national insurance number.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's working illegally without a right to work, if the employer isn't asking for a national insurance number, they're not going to ask for a digital ID. So it's not going to matter. It's not going to change anything. So the same with Neuralink, same with electric cars, whatever it might be. They'll use an argument which you can say, okay, well, if that was real, that would make some sense. But it's never real. It's never true. It's always based on a lie. And they unfortunately know that most people won't do the research. They'll read the headline, they might read the first paragraph, and then they just get on with their day.
Oh, that was me, just regurging things. Absolutely, 100% hold my hands up to it. And people that I thought, friends of mine who had similar views to an extent, that were calling people out, like Elon Musk 3 years ago, I just thought, you know what, I agree with this and that you say, but that's a bridge too far. I just thought some of the views were a bit too extreme.
Yeah.
And pretty much everything they've said has now kind of came into fruition, much like your dad's ramblings from 30 years ago that have now been proven to be true. And it's almost like you get this level of clarity and you start seeing the playbook being exposed, and it's like, whoa, I'm just remembering these little flashbacks from when my friend AJ said this, or I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, well, I think when you understand what the outcome they want is, you can kind of plot a pretty good journey to how they're going to get there, and you can start to see the different steps in place. So, like, you mentioned the Chinese credit system that they have. Well, the foundation of that is a digital ID, a digital footprint, where they can control everything. Like, I remember when they announced digital ID, my brother used a really good analogy, which is, this is like the base of the pizza. Everything goes on top of that, and without the base, you can't do everything else. So, and again, you can apply that to so many things we're seeing here. So ULEZ in London, all those cameras that are all of a sudden everywhere now. Well, there's your facial recognition technology right there, ready and waiting. Digital ID will tie into that. Central bank digital currencies will then tie into, like you said, the money that can be taken from you for whatever without you doing anything. It all ties in together.
It'll be linked to your driver's license. It will be linked to every aspect of your life.
Yeah. There's even certain food packaging now that talks about carbon credits. You can't have that. You can't have a steak. You had one last week. It is getting to that point.
That happened in Australia during COVID.
Yeah, they did.
You could only buy
things.
X amount of alcohol. I think I can't remember what it was. 6 bottles of wine a week, 3 bottles of wine a week. Might have been Victoria. If that was Dan Andrews region, was it?
Yeah, Victoria, Melbourne. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that was the first time that I'd sort of, maybe in North Korea, but that I'd kind of witnessed this with a
Australia's
Western
quite
country.
like that, to be fair. Australia is quite like that. It's a Western country in the middle of Asia, the other side of the world, Australasia, and it's got a lot. I remember when I went there in 2016, there was a lot of fear about how close Chinese government and Australia were in terms of influence. Chinese state government own the water, national water in Australia, so they essentially own our equivalent of the national grid, but water. It's bizarre, isn't it? Why?
How do more people not know this?
Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy. Australia's a satellite state, really. America have got a massive underground military base there, right in the centre, near a place called Alice Springs, which is where Ayers Rock is. A massive military base called Pine Gap, which is what they call a deep underground military base. And when you see it, it's literally like three small buildings above the surface. Everything else is underground. And every single thing that comes into that base, food, drink, equipment, all comes from America once a week on a 747 military plane. So literally that base is almost like its own entity. Nothing from the outside world comes in. As you drive up to it, there's loads of warning signs to get anywhere near it. And they have like a pulse weapon type thing that goes out around the base that if you get anywhere near it, you get like a headache. Like, the crowd dispersal techniques they use at riots and stuff, where they pitch noises and like water cannons and stuff like that. They have that kind of technology that protects the base. Why? On another country's land. And what's more interesting on that is the president's security clearance doesn't allow him to know what happens there. There's 16 security clearances above the president. So who decides what happens there?
Well, the military stuff's very interesting, isn't it? Because we talk about COVID, the psyop that was COVID, and big pharma. At least some of us are talking about that. But actually what sits above big pharma, which I wasn't aware of really until I read some of your dad's books, funnily enough, was that the military sits above big pharma, above pretty much everything. Yeah.
And in some countries that's open. That's out in the open. So take Israel, for example. The Israeli Mossad agent, their security level is higher than the ambassador of any given country. So in this country, where you'll have the Israeli embassy and you'll have the ambassador to Britain, the Mossad operation out of that embassy, which is in Kensington here, his security clearance is going to be higher than that ambassador. So in those countries, it's open. Same in Saudi Arabia, same in lots of other countries. Now, officially, it's the other way around, where someone has to be in an elected position to be making such decisions. It's not the case at all. So when you have an election here, who appoints the military generals? Who appoints the head of the military? You have a defense secretary, but all he does is get told what to do. Same in America. You have the Secretary of State. Sorry, not Secretary of State. Defense Secretary again. Again, the Pentagon is what runs the operation. And if you look at that's why if you look at presidents and particularly, potential prime ministers that have been anti-war, they were never going to be allowed to get anywhere. Because
look at the Kennedy assassination.
Kennedy, to be fair, I'm not a big fan. I think he's very weak. But look at Jeremy Corbyn here. He was never going to be allowed to be prime minister because of that rhetoric, that anti-war rhetoric. The military run the show, completely run the show. You look at the defense budget of countries like America. They spend more than the next, I think it's 10 countries combined, something like that. Yet Russia are the threat, apparently. Like it's just madness. The fact that you're trying to explain the concept of the military to people is just bizarre when you speak out loud. Like I used to say to people, like, imagine like an alien race landed here now, and you were the first person they met, and your job was to explain human beings and the earth to them. It's like you'd get through a sentence and be like, "We are mental. We are mental." And the military, good example of that is you've got one planet and you've got however many thousand nuclear weapons that a handful of countries have that could destroy it 1,000 times over. And some overgrown child in the White House apparently got a big red button. Like it's like a Simpsons episode. It's bizarre. It's just absolutely insane to me. And that is one of the big things. You're never going to have a peaceful world when so many people profit from it not being. Mm-hmm. And human conflict it's been a generational thing, isn't it? Go back to when we were tribes. Tribes were fighting each other with spears and sticks, and now it's evolved into fancy planes and warships. But the same narrative is what's gone on, that people are fighting. And I think it's so sad because if you chucked a bunch of kids from every different background in the world in a room, they're not going to fight. They're not going to look at colour or religion or race or creed or anything, or ask them how much does your dad earn? How much does your dad? They're not. They're just going to get on with each other.
This
Yeah,
is
that
another
gets
reason that psilocybin's
taught out of us.
illegal as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
The reason I mention that is that it was such a profound thing for me a couple of years ago when I did my first mushroom journey. It changed my entire outlook, how I saw things. I just felt so connected to everyone and everything that's gone before, to nature, just understanding that there is no issue with humanity. We're just being pitted against each
Yep.
other. It sounds a little bit woo-woo and a little bit spiritual, but fundamentally, like if you remove yourself from social media, if you don't absorb anything from the mainstream media, if you just stand back from this whole matrix, we aren't born with any kind of hatred inside of us.
We're not. That's why, kids will always play together. They don't see colour. They don't see things like that. That's learned. No form of hate to me is innate. It's learned. It's educated into people on both sides, in the sense of, you've got certain demographics that are taught that you're a victim from very young, and that the rest of the world hates you, and that you need to stick together, and that you're never going to get opportunities because of the colour of your skin or the religion you follow. Which again, I think that's just as bad as teaching somebody to hate someone from a different race. It's just as bad, because you're giving someone a victim complex when they don't necessarily need one. You're teaching somebody they're less than somebody else. So I think that we've got a lot of questions to answer in terms of how kids are raised and how things like that are imprinted into them from such a young age. Because most people just want to get on. Most people want to get on. They want to find someone to love. They want to have a family. They want to do a job they enjoy. They want to go on holiday a couple of times a year, and they just want to get on. Most people are not that bothered about, someone's skin color or someone's belief system or whatever. Most people aren't. And I think my attitude is just, I don't really care what you think or believe, just don't impose it on others.
Mm-hmm.
If you believe something, you want to live your life a certain way, as long as the people around you are happy with that, go ahead. Just don't tell me I have to live it the same way. I'd never tell someone how to raise their children. I raise mine, me and my wife raise ours in a certain way. I'm never going to tell you to do it the same, because it might be completely different. And I think as long as that sort of respect for different perspectives and different views and the people to live their lives how they choose to live them, then we'd live in a really different world. Whereas whether it's, in some of the more openly oppressive countries like North Korea you mentioned, you're forced to live a certain way based on the state. You can't step outside it. Or whether it's, a religion where you're forced to be indoctrinated into it, whether it's because of your parents or the family you're born into, whatever, or the way you live in the world. I just think that's so wrong, because whatever your belief system is on life and what life means and what happens next and what happened before, you're here right now once. Whether you believe you have eternal life and you live, in a spiritual form, or whether you believe this is the one time and you're in the ground at the end, whatever, it's your decision how you live your life. It's no one else's. Like, I've never understood people that live their life in a certain way to appease others. So like the people that marry a certain person because their dad wanted them to. Well, your dad's not going to be here one day, and then you're going to be on your own. And what are you going to do? Be resentful? And the sad thing is, how many people then do the same thing with their own kids? They do exactly what they didn't want when they were growing up, and they then just repeat the cycle, and it goes and goes and goes again. Or how, societal or social pressure forces people to do things that they definitely wouldn't do if they had their own opinion. Like if you lined up 10 people from this office here, randomly lined them up and said, are you doing what you really, really want? If what your friends expect or family expect, or money is a big one, if those things weren't a problem, you could take them off the table, would you be doing what you're doing now? I think most people would say no. 7 out of 10, I reckon, would say no. And that's just, to me, that's one of the saddest things about the world, is the amount of people that probably get to the end and think, what was it all about, really?
It's interesting. I was telling you a little bit about my own circumstances and how they've changed dramatically over the last couple of years. But when you ask that question, I'm answering it, and the answer is an unequivocal yes. I'm doing what I want to do. And I'm arguably living a very wealthy and successful life, more so than ever before, because to me, success is freedom. It's being able to do what you
100%.
want, when you want, with the people that you want, and also to be mission-led and contribute in a positive manner to the world, which hopefully having conversations like this will actually do, as opposed to having somebody else's opinions opposed on me and putting my ladder against the wrong wall. And I've interviewed so many people, your multimillionaires and your billionaires, and whilst I'm all in favour of abundance in every area, money will not be my God. And I think while ever money's anyone's God, you're open to corruption and manipulation.
Yeah, it's never going to make you
Control.
happy. Never going to make you happy. There's a really good line in the second Italian Job film, the remake, where they said about if money can be two things: it can enrich your life or it can define it. And if it defines it, you've got a serious problem. And I think most people will agree that having a bit of extra money will make certain situations, pretty much any situation, a little bit better. If you've got a marriage, taking stress away of money concerns, that's going to obviously put less pressure on your marriage. If you can give your kids a bit of a better upbringing, in the sense of you can maybe send them to a better school, you can live in a nicer area, you can take them on trips, whatever, of course that's going to be beneficial. If you're born into money and you can then, rather than at 16 be like, I need to go and get a job because I've got to pay my way, you can maybe see if your band works out, see if you follow a sports ambit, whatever it might be, you've got that opportunity to do that. Because in the world we live in, money is choice, really. It's just the more choices you can make, the more free you are. And money generally gives you a few more choices. So it can absolutely make what is already good better, but it can't define it. If you've got money and nothing else, to me, you've got nothing. Like, I'd be, stressed, but I'd be happy with my wife and my boys in a bed sit if we were still all together and we lost everything. As long as we were still all together, you'd work out how to get back to something. But you can be, you've mentioned you've sat down with some very, successful people by that metric of money. I've met a lot, and some of them are some of the most unhappy people you will meet because they're unfulfilled. Because for me, what are you measuring? When is enough isn't enough? What are you measuring it by? And I think, just certainly from my perspective, and I guess people with families can understand this, that the day that you have your first child, nothing compares to that. No cars, no houses, no 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure bank balances are gonna. Well, not that I can say I've had those, but
Like to test that theory.
They're never gonna feel like that. They're not.
Has anyone ever tried to corrupt you?
Not really. No, not really. In terms of what, like money to do something or say you don't know? Not really.
Probably too far gone.
I think
He's an Icke. There's no point.
Yeah, I think there's no. Yeah, I think they'd know they'd be barking up the wrong tree there. Definitely.
Does it frustrate you? We were chatting about this before, but the whole controlled opposition thing, there's so much skepticism within this space that I've even had people saying to me when I'm coming to interview you guys, oh, David Icke, yeah, he's controlled opposition.
It depends what you define controlled opposition as, because everyone's it. Everyone gets called it. So to me, what controlled opposition means is somebody that knows what they're doing and is actively doing something to try and damage the movement or damage the truth movement.
Like
so,
Elon Musk's.
Yeah, so people that might chuck out something that, like we were saying earlier, chuck out 10% of truths that pulls you in.
Andrew Tate.
Yeah, so Andrew Tate, good example. Yes, there's a masculinity crisis. Yes, young men are completely unfulfilled and being taken down a route that doesn't benefit anyone, doesn't benefit women, doesn't benefit men, doesn't benefit the world. That bit is true. But then where he goes with it is completely off track, completely, to the extreme. So for me, controlled opposition would be somebody that says a percentage of stuff that you're going to get people on board with and then uses that interest to then spout 90% of crap and knows they're doing it. I think there's a difference between that and ignorance, which is people that maybe like I said earlier about being uncomfortable saying, I don't know that subject. You get those people that may research an area and maybe an absolute expert in that area, but then pontificate about how that fits with that when they have no idea. To me, that's a difference. That's not necessarily controlled. That's just arrogance and a bit of ignorance that you think you know the whole plot when you maybe know a little piece of it. Like, I don't claim to know anything like the whole piece of it. I think I can speak quite in depth about the health angle and how people are being attacked, and the psychological and that masculinity angle. But I'm not going to sit here and talk to you about some of the deep esoteric stuff, because I don't know it in the same way as other people. I defer you to people that do. So I think there's two aspects. I think there's definitely people that are in there who are absolutely controlled, whether they're on the payroll of the state, whether they're opportunists that are in there to muddy the waters. I definitely think that. And I also think then there's people who just see this as a bit of a window and have an area that they maybe are knowledgeable in, but then spout about everything else as if they know about that when they don't. And that they're not the same to me. Because I think one is sinister, one is just a little bit arrogant.
How controlled do you think the mainstream opposition is?
So give some names. Who do you think?
Oh, well, let's talk about, I'm a bit of a Candice fangirl. We've got sort of conflicting views on Candice, haven't we?
Well, I don't know what Candice Owens' motivations are. I don't know her. I know a few people that do, and they say her intentions are genuine, but I don't know enough about her personally to have a real opinion on her. I think some of her connections and some of her funding comes from questionable sources. And I think also people that kind of flip-flop on where they stand and don't necessarily acknowledge that, almost just like pretend that bit didn't happen and move on to the next thing. I'm always a bit wary of those people as well. Like for me, if I changed my opinion completely on something, I'd openly explain why I've done that. Whereas I feel like, there's a few names, she's one of them, that kind of have gone from, when she was at Daily Wire, obviously she was it's a very pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist channel, and then she started to speak out, and then obviously has now done her own thing where she's going fully against them. So I'd have some questions on that, but I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say she's controlled, because I don't know that. I'd say there's a few questions which she might well very credibly be able to answer. But I think that's part of the alternative media that's really important, is if we're going to say question everything, that means question everyone as well, including us, including me, including her, including everyone and any name. Because if you're gonna encourage people to think critically, then you can't be offended if they question you as well, which I understand. If you looked at the mainstream media and understand they're lying to you about everything, then it would be naive to blindly believe that everyone that claims to be alternative is coming from a good place, because I don't think all of them are.
But he's going back to the point we were making earlier about health, when I was saying I actually don't think a lot of people do know this information. I also don't think people know that they don't know the information, because you don't know what you don't know, and they don't necessarily know what that gap looks like. And the other thing is that people then don't know who to follow. It's okay to do the research and get alternative opinions, but a classic example would be my best friend took the COVID vaccine. She's taken all the COVID vaccines. She will still continue to take the COVID vaccines. And when I've repeatedly asked her why she's not doing more research, she is citing things like, well, I've been on BBC News, I've Googled this, and everything she's saying to me is coming from a mainstream agenda. There is no alternatives, which I find incredibly frustrating. Obviously, we've got things like podcasts, but how would people even know at this point what podcasters to follow? Who's credible? Who's just regurgitating information without doing their own fact checking, as I've done in the past, just taking things at face value, and then it's been disproven.
Well, I think for me with health, the easy one to look at is you can't really deny what you're seeing with your own eyes. You look at a photo of a beach in the 60s, you look at a photo of a beach today.
Beach wheels.
Exactly. You stand at the end of a high street in any town, and you watch how many people are walking with some kind of limp, or they look ill, or there's some kind of ailment. You compare that to not that long ago. You can't deny that health of people is not going in the right direction. And also, you can look at your own life, and I think whether you follow people, I don't follow anyone religiously, health-wise. I'm interested in it to the point that I kind of trial and error, figure stuff out for myself. So whenever anyone asks me, where do I start? I go, just get a little diary and write down how you felt 10 minutes, an hour, and the next morning after you had a certain food. Because you'll start to immediately see how you feel. You get a bit more in touch with your body, because most people just eat and then get on with their lives. You get a bit more in touch with your body of, did I feel bloated? Did I feel brain fog? How did I sleep? Did I get up feeling tired? And you can quite quickly, within a week, figure out what works for you and what doesn't. And that's a really easy place to start. You don't need to follow anybody to do that. But I think, like you mentioned, most people don't know or don't think about that. It's because they're kept so busy in many ways by whatever they're doing, their lives, that they don't take the time to put into themselves. And I think when people actually do that, take a step back and go, actually, how do I feel? Most people are going, actually, I don't feel great. I ate that, or I've eaten this every day, or whatever. It doesn't make me feel great. And that's when you have a bit of a reassessment, I think. So for me, I never recommend any particular diet or anything like that. I would always just recommend trying an error. Your body will tell you whether you're doing the right thing or not. Like, your body is sending you messages all the time. If you ignore it, it's just going to get louder and louder to the point you can't ignore it when you get properly ill.
We've been in communication for quite a few years now, and it's been great to see your own evolution on the health fronts and the events that you're doing. You've upped your game with the fitness. I know you do your intermittent fasting. You're always out hiking, cold water exposure, cutting out processed food. And like you say, you're now using your platform to bring in other health experts as well. But you don't just talk about the physical health. You're also looking at the more like the energy healing side of it, the mental health side of it as well. And it's so intertwined. Anyone listening to this is thinking, well, why are you going off on a tangent talking about that? It could not be more connected. And everything that you, as a company within Iconic, talk about is countering the narrative by keeping the frequency high. It's keeping in optimal health and just making sure that you're firing on all cylinders.
Well, I think that's a really important issue, is that pretty much every subject we discussed are connected in one way, shape or form. And I think that's where it's important for people to understand, is that everything is connected. Your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health are all fundamentally connected. You can be eating organic meat, broccoli, avocado every day, but if you're in a toxic relationship when you're rowing your partner every night, you're not going to be healthy. That's not going to be great. If you're in a job that completely burns you into the ground, no matter what you eat or go to the gym, you're not going to be in a healthy state. All those things have to be in balance. I think quite a lot of people probably have one or two of them in balance, but having all three is really, really key. And I think when you mentioned vibration, I think it's tough when you're in this area, because as you mentioned earlier, we talk about some really dark topics that can be really difficult. And, I find it every morning with the breakfast show we do. You go on Twitter to go and start looking at news stories, and you'll see a video of something and you're like, 6:30 and I've seen a bomb go off. It can be really difficult. I'm not gonna sit here and say it's not. But I think when it comes to the energetic side of it, is there's so many things out there to try and bring us down. Like, that's what most of social media does. Very few people go on social media and feel better afterwards. You've got to counteract that in some way, because otherwise you're just going to get pulled down where you're not going to make any kind of contribution. And I think having your energy at a higher level is going to impact everything in your life in a better way, because energy is contagious. Most people would think that's crazy, but when you walk into a room that's had a row in there, you can tell. Mm-hmm. When you walk into a room that is full of energy, with people bubbly and people vibrant, you want to spend time in that place. We've all met people that you'll sit next to and be like, I haven't even heard you speak, but there's something about you. I want to spend time with you. You've got a good energy about you. In the same way you'll meet people that just make you feel really negative and down and dour. And I think we have a decision whether we're going to be one of those people or the other person. You're going to inspire the people around you, or you're going to bring them down. And I think if you get the high vibration energy right, then everything else in your life will follow. You're going to be a better partner. You're going to be better at work. You're going to be a better parent. You're going to be able to contribute more. So I always look at everything and go, okay, so what is the system in any given scenario trying to make me do? And I'm going to do the opposite. So it wants me to feel crap. It wants me to look and think that, resistance is futile. It wants me to be fat, unhealthy, chronically inflamed with however many different medications for chronic illnesses. I'm going to do the opposite, because that's the best way to stick 2 fingers up, and then build everything else from there. Like, there used to be a funny line, which every time you smile, an archon goes hungry, which I think, if you almost look at it from that perspective, that, every time you put out some positivity, you're circumventing the fact that they're trying to put out the exact opposite, which sounds a bit idealistic. Maybe people might be arguing, going, how do you do that in certain parts of the world? And I get that, but what's the alternative? Sit on social media looking at how bad everything is day in, day out, going so inward, being negative, being all of those things. Like,
can you understand why so many people want to remain oblivious, that understand how the world works but refuse to get involved? They don't want to get involved with social media. They don't want to engage with the mainstream media. I always find it quite an interesting sort of argument, really, because I think burying your head in the sand isn't going to move the needle. But
No.
equally, I understand that living in fear and coming from, that low frequency is counterproductive as well.
Yeah, no, I used to get it, not so much anymore. I used to get it because you could almost ignore it and pretend it wasn't happening. And now I don't think you can, because whether you buy into something, whether you don't, whether you're interested in it, whether you're not, it's starting to affect you. Whether it's affecting you financially, whether it's affecting you when you walk down the street and you feel unsafe, whatever it might be, it's affecting you in some way now, the direction of travel. And I think unless you start to get educated into what that is and start to try and resist, it's only going to keep going in that direction. I think for anyone that has a family and knows that, one day you're leaving behind somebody to fend for themselves here, what's it going to look like now? Like my sons are 4 and 5. I dread to think what the world's going to look like when they're my age in 30 years' time. Like, it's actually a terrifying proposition, really. I sometimes feel almost, why did we have you? In terms of from their perspective of what have we brought you into, kind of thing. I think that the kind of burying your head in the sand, that ignorance is bliss. It's only bliss for a while. So I don't understand that mindset anymore, no. I used to, because, like I said, you could almost get through your life without worrying too much if you just ignored it. Whereas now you can't. Now you can't. And the problem you have is whether you are acknowledging it or whether you're not, they're still going to turn up at your door one day. All those things that you think you're ignoring and pretending don't happen are still happening. And I think being informed and understanding them and being able to push back against them, that is, well, one, it's the only way you're going to turn it around. And it's the only way to prevent that fear, low vibrational energy that you're talking about. Because if you just see something happening and you don't understand why it's happening and you feel helpless, you're going to feel scared. You're going to feel in a state of fear. Whereas when you actually sit here and go, you know what? I know what's happening. I know why it's happening. And I know how we're going to get around it. You might be apprehensive in a bit, but you've got a roadmap, no pun intended, to how you're going to bring about a change. I think that's the key.
So how do people bring about change then? I know that you're in the process of arranging a demonstration at the moment. We spoke earlier about signing petitions. You and I have got platforms that we can use to bring this information to the masses. But for the average person in the street that's not got a podcast or thousands of people on their social media, what can they be doing?
I think it's got to start with self-respect. Everything you do, you've got to respect yourself for doing it. So how many people went along with lockdowns, but they didn't want to? They did it because they were scared somebody at Tesco on the door would have a go at them, or what their friends would think, or they were scared to tell their friends. For example, I won't name names, but I know 2 people that had never got the vaccine. All their friends think they did because they're too scared to tell them. And I think for me, that sort of revolution of perception is where it begins, which again sounds, people will say that's idealistic, but it's got to start with that. It's got to start with the person in the mirror. You're not just here to work, pay bills, die, be a little minion that you're told what to do. You're not here for that. You're here to be a sovereign human being, and you've got to do what works for you and what feels right for you. And if you're being taken in a direction that doesn't work for you, doesn't work for your family, you can see doesn't work for the people around you, then don't do it. And, people will say, well, how that's really difficult because you've got to go, well, not really. I lived my whole life through COVID. I never wore a mask once. I never had a test once. I never had a vaccine, obviously. I didn't do certain things because, you couldn't. But I got all my life. I got all my life. I wasn't allowed to be there for the birth of my son, I was told. I was there. I wasn't having it. I went in. And no one had to go. And I think you've just got to stand up for what you believe to be right. And so many people go along with things that they know are wrong because they think it's easier. It's not easier. It might have been once, but right now it's not. And the digital ID is a really, really good one. You mentioned the demonstration that we're doing on the 13th. Yeah. If people don't resist that, then that's the beginning of the end in some ways, because it's the start of something so important for them. It's the foundational thing on so many of these controlling things that they want to bring in. That if you're not going to resist that, then it's almost pointless in some ways. So for me, the answer is become ungovernable. And remember that they work for you, not the other way around. There's 650 MPs, there's 70 million people, whatever, in the country. They can't impose physically on us if we don't want to go ahead with something. So rather than just accepting, I don't like that, but we'll do it anyway. No, don't do that. Don't accept it. Don't say yes. And a really good example with the health one, which ties into this, is when you go into the supermarkets and they've got all that processed food you mentioned, if no one bought it, it's not going to be there for very long, is it? They're only there because people buy it. You can just with where you choose to spend your money, just with where you choose to spend your time.
But do you not think
a huge impact on them?
You could say that with regards to the newspapers as well and the mainstream media, but you and I will both tap into those to find out what the current agenda is.
Yeah, but then when you go onto the mainstream newspapers, as you do probably most days, they're all begging for money. They're all begging for donations or subscriptions or all of that, when they weren't 5 years ago, they weren't 10 years ago, because they've been squeezed so much because, they can't demand however many thousands an ad anymore because their reach is not as big as it once was. So the influence of the mainstream media has diminished massively because people have hit them with their wallets. They don't buy them. All of the BBC are in massive trouble financially because people are cancelling their TV licenses and people aren't watching it anymore. ITV, I've just read this week, have been bought out. We're in the process of being bought out by an American company. These people are feeling the pain of people turning their back on them. So we do have a lot of power, I think, in that respect, with simple one where we spend our money. If the education system continues to indoctrinate kids, don't send your kids to school. Home educate, take them out of the system.
I was just about to ask you, you are homeschooling yourself, aren't you?
Yeah. So our kids are what's called flexi schools. So found a really cool school. So they go there 2 days a week, homeschool 3 days a week. And mainly the school's great. It's independent, first name terms for teachers, no school uniforms, only 30 kids, all the friends that my kids have got at the school, their parents are very interested in this information, like those kids weren't vaccinated or anything like that. So it's a very awake school in that respect. So that's why I'm really happy for them to go there. And then, at home 3 days a week. And I think, if you're not happy with what they're being taught in mainstream schools, do your best you can to get them out of there. We know that the mainstream medical system is only going to take you in a certain direction. So make it obsolete. Don't take it. Don't use it. Do your best to, because it's a healthcare system. You could do a whole conversation on that. It's a healthcare system that's based on reacting to you being sick. It's not based on preventing you being sick. So you've got to take that initiative yourself with what you eat, how you supplement, what you don't eat. And if you do that right, you're not going to need it. Really, you're not going to need it in the same way that you would do if you did everything you were told to do as what's considered healthy. You're then going to end up in there probably quite quickly. A lot of people do. If those systems are just made obsolete, how do they stand? They don't. Their power and influence diminishes more and more as less and less people become dependent on them. That's why in whatever institution you want to look at, the system is trying to create a dependency upon them, whether it's a financial dependence, whether it's an education dependence, whether it's a health dependence, whatever it is, because dependency creates control. Mm-hmm. And I did a podcast the other week and I was talking about comparing it to the dynamic between a parent and a child. As your child gets older, they get less and less dependent on you as a parent, and therefore your influence goes down. Like my kids now at 4 and 5, they eat what I let them eat. Whereas when they're 15 and they've got pocket money, or if they've got a job and they want to go and get them, I can't really stop them. And I think your job as a parent is to help aid that reduction in dependency as your kids get older. It's a sad realization, but your job as a parent really is to teach your kids to live without you.
Yeah.
That's really it. And I think a government should have the same attitude, which is we want our population less and less dependent on us, almost to the point that we can just step back and go, we'll just take care of the basics, but the rest of it, you guys are handling on your own. But then you have less control. And that's obviously why the system is built the completely other way around to that, because they want control.
I feel so blessed that my children were the age that they were when COVID happened. So I've got an 8, a 9 and a 13-year-old. The 8 and 9-year-old, you could say COVID, they don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They stayed at home. It was very normal. They never saw us wearing masks or we didn't have the telly on. They've just got absolutely no recollection whatsoever of COVID. It's never been discussed. My eldest, she was attending primary school, thankfully not secondary, where they were mandated to wear the masks, because we certainly wouldn't have encouraged her to wear a mask. But I also know a lot of parents who then were in conflict with their own children because the children wanted to wear the masks because of peer pressure from their friends. They were then getting ostracised for not complying. But the issue I had was that they were sitting the kids down at the end of every day or whenever it came on to watch Newsround.
Yeah.
So I'm then watching Newsround to see what information that they're getting, and then having to sit down and say to my eldest Sienna about, the agenda and that this isn't our beliefs. And then you're having to have conversations with the school that you don't then want your child to be taken into the assembly hall and exposed to this bullshit, which then, like I said, causes a problem, causes a divide between them and the other children.
Yeah.
In the same way now, she's almost kind of battling against me, and having to kind of go through that education process around vaccinations and why she's the only child in the school that's not getting the flu jab, and why I'm going to keep her off on those days. And it's relentless. But I'm now in a situation, we talk about definition of success and not being governed by money. However, money provides freedom, security and choices.
Yeah.
And I'm in a position at the moment where I have to go out and work, and I'm a single parent, and I wouldn't have the option at this point today of pulling my 3 children out of mainstream education to provide, it'd be a case of, just sit there and watch this YouTube video. and also, I'm not going to lie, from about age 5, they've probably got better math skills than I do.
Right.
I can't remember anything about Pythagoras or anything like that. So it's very difficult, but it kind of fills me with dread a little bit. One of my biggest goals is that by the time my youngest 2, they're in year 4 at the moment, by the time they finish year 6, that I'm able to provide alternative reality for them and not have to send them to secondary education, because they're in a phenomenal little primary school at the moment. We don't really have any issues. But I think when they start getting to 11 and 12, that's when they start ramping up the agenda.
It can be when it gets worse, what they're teaching kids in around that age and sex education is bizarre now as well. Like, I've got a friend he demanded the school sent him everything they were going to teach his daughter. She's around the same age as your oldest. And they redacted so much of what they were going to teach or telling him from what they were going to teach. But I think also not just necessarily taking your kids out of school. That's not the only answer. Because like you say, for so many people, it's not feasible. But I think when you're aware of something, the power of it is reduced massively. For example, if you're listening to a news bulletin and you're aware, right, you're trying to make me think this based on something. You're trying to make me think this person did that, or this person, whatever. It reduces its power massively. So I think where, you mentioned like your oldest daughter, she can come home and ask you, I learned this at school. What's the real story behind that? She can do that. And I think that's just as powerful in many ways, because they're not going to just, that's gospel because my teacher said it. They can come home and ask questions. Because I went to school right through, went to college, did it all.
I'm surprised your dad allowed that.
Well, for a start, it was a long time ago now. But, the system wasn't quite as bad then. But again, I could go home and ask questions. I could go home and understand more things. And the joke is, you mentioned Pythagoras. Have you ever used that in your actual life? I loved maths. I got an A in GCSE maths. Absolutely loved it. But so much of it is just, you don't need so many of the things you learn in school as well. Like all the education I've had around health and economics that are my 2 areas of interest, I've learned from reading books since I've been 18, 19, 20. You don't learn so much in school. Like the fundamentals of life, reading, writing, things like that, that's really important. But so much of what you learn in secondary school is nothing. All the history you learn, it's all subjective. All the geography you learn, a lot of it's subjective. Like I remember learning about climate change. Like, you're teaching that like it's a fact. So much of what you learn at school you don't need in real life. That's why so many really, really wealthy individuals all homeschool their kids. They all homeschool their kids. You look at like Grant Cardone, for example, obviously a very successful guy, talks about how, you get your kids out of school as soon as you can. Because they're not learning anything that's actually useful for them. They're not learning how to think critically. They're just learning how to essentially remember something they were told and write it on an exam paper. That's not education, that's indoctrination.
It was actually a conference I attended in 2018 with Grant Cardone that completely changed the trajectory of my life and my mindset and everything else.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I don't know him, but watching some of his clips and reels is inspiring.
Yeah.
Certainly in that respect, like certainly the family side of it, I really like what he talks about.
Very passionate guy. Name of the podcast is On a Mission. Jaymie, what is your mission?
Simple answer is to leave the world in a better state than it was the day I was born. Whatever that looks like, I don't know. Don't know exactly yet. But for me, I just want to do something that is trying to take the world in a better direction. I think really, like we touched on masculinity, I think that's part of the crisis is meaning. People don't have a meaning. They don't have a mission. Like you asked the question. I think most people don't take the time to ask that question of themselves. What am I doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? It's just, survival. For me, I want to, on a level with my family, I want to set my kids up in life by showing them what a healthy marriage looks like, showing them how to, I've got 2 boys, so showing them how a man should behave. And then on the wider world, try and inspire a few people to think a bit bigger than their little me, and they're a little minion that needs somebody more educated than them to tell them how to live their lives. And just try and inspire people to become the best versions of themselves, whatever that means to them.
I love it. You're definitely a man on a mission. I feel like we're only just scratching the surface, so we'll need to get you back. But for now, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah.